All right, let's dive right in. After seeing one of the wildest rallies in precious metals ever, pretty much everyone is asking the exact same thing. So today, we're going to dig in and see what might just be the next massive story in the global metals market. Let's get to it. I mean, the setup here is just incredible, right? In 2025, you had gold just surging, up over 60%. And silver? Silver went on an absolutely staggering run, over 150%. Now, when you see moves like that, investors everywhere start looking around, trying to find that next big opportunity before it's all over the news. And this quote? It really hits the nail on the head for what we're talking about today. See, it's not about chasing the things that have already popped. It's about really understanding the deep structural story behind a market that could be, right on the edge of a huge fundamental shift. So, what is all the whispering about? Well, it's about copper. Yeah, while gold and silver were grabbing every single headline, copper was quietly putting up a really solid 40% gain last year. And now, the story underneath it all is starting to look unbelievably compelling. What's really fascinating here is how people are starting to think about this metal. For decades, copper was just, well, it was a boring indicator for construction, right? But that is fundamentally changing. People are now seeing it as a strategic asset, something that's absolutely essential for future economic growth and even energy security. So, what's behind this major shift? Well, it all starts with the first part of this whole equation, a massive, and I mean massive, explosion in demand. Some experts are actually calling copper the bloodline of modern growth. And seriously, that is not an exaggeration. It's not just important, it is absolutely indispensable to the three biggest technological and environmental shifts happening in our world today. And these are the big three, the pillars of copper demand. First up, the green energy transition. Just think about it. Solar farms, giant wind turbines, and all the grid upgrades needed to handle them, we're talking tons and tons of copper wiring. Then you've got the EV boom. And third, the AI and data center build-out, which needs a ridiculous amount of copper for power and for cooling all that hardware. And to really get a sense of just how big the EV impact is, get this. A single electric vehicle needs 3 to 4 times more copper than your standard gasoline-powered car. That's not a small bump. That is a structural step change in demand from one of the world's biggest industries. Okay, so a huge demand story is one thing. But what makes this potentially explosive is when you look at the other side of the coin, what we're calling the great supply squeeze. The basic conflict here is actually pretty simple, but it is incredibly powerful. On one side, you have demand that is structural, it's speeding up and it's urgent. But on the other side, you've got a supply chain that is super constrained with this crazy 10 to 15-year lag before any new major mine can even come online. That, my friends, is a classic recipe for a potential price shock. So you gotta ask, why can't we just, dig up more? Well, it is not that simple. Not even close. It takes over a decade to get a new mine from discovery all the way to production. Environmental rules are getting tougher and tougher. There are constant political and labor risks in the big mining regions like South America, and most of the money is just going into trying to squeeze a little more out of old mines, not building brand new ones. And what happens when you have this kind of mismatch? It leads to what the market calls a re-rating cycle. Basically, when a super important metal like copper gets into a long-term structural deficit, where demand just keeps outpacing supply, the market has no choice but to price it higher and higher and higher over time. This is literally how commodity supercycles get started. But of course, no market ever just goes up in a straight line. So to get the full picture, we have to talk about the reality checks, the potential headwinds that could make this a bumpy ride. It's really important to remember that copper is still cyclical. That means it's super sensitive to global economic slowdowns. China is the world's biggest user, so any weakness there can cause prices to dip. We've also seen inventories tick up recently, and, geopolitics can always throw a wrench in the works and create these sharp, unpredictable swings. So while the long-term story looks strong, the short-term path could be pretty volatile. So now that we've got the whole picture, the demand, the supply, and the risks, how would someone even get exposure to this whole theme? Let's quickly run through a few of the available tools. The options really run the gamut on risk. You've got copper futures, which give you the most direct exposure, but they're very high risk and really just for experienced traders. Then there are mining stocks, which is a popular way to go, but you're also taking on risks specific to that company. For beginners or long-term investors, a diversified metal ETF is probably a medium-risk approach. And for more advanced folks, global copper ETFs can give you that direct exposure to the international story.
All right, let's pull it all together now. Let's get to the final verdict and circle all the way back to our original question. What comes after that big precious metals rally?
And I think this slide really captures the new dynamic perfectly. Gold's role is timeless, right? It's a safe haven. It protects wealth, it represents financial security. But copper's role is evolving into something totally different. It stands for strategic growth, it literally powers the future, and it's becoming absolutely central to both our economic and our energy security. And that's the key takeaway here. This isn't about fortune telling, trying to predict a specific price on a specific day. The real goal is to understand the fundamentals of a huge cycle before everyone else does, to see that structural shift from a simple industrial metal to a critical strategic one. And this might be the most powerful way to think about it. Just like oil was the one resource you absolutely had to have for the 20th century economy, copper is looking more and more like the non-negotiable, must-have resource for the 21st century energy transition. And so we'll leave you with this final thought. For centuries, gold has been the asset that protects the wealth we've already built. But as we look ahead into a world that's going to be run on electricity, on EVs, on AI, the huge question is whether copper is going to be the strategic asset that powers our future. It's a pretty compelling thought to chew on.